Hi, Leah from my sewing room here. Today I've got a little demo for you. So if you're in our Facebook group, you may have seen a picture I posted on the weekend of a rather large English paper pieced hexagon project, and it's hiding behind me here. So I have a really hard time staying awake when I watch TV, and I have a really, really hard time staying awake in the car. And my husband much prefers that I stay awake while I'm a navigator in the car. So I hand sew while we drive. So summer holidays, road trips to see family, back in the days when we went places, hand sewing comes with me, and specifically English paper piecing comes with me on all my drives so that I'm a better passenger. And it kind of lives next to me in the living room so that I stay awake while I watch TV. So anyway, this particular little project, this is like a queen size quilt top. It's all sewn by hand. It is not a fast project. It took me about 8 years. So this isn't like a get started and get finished right away. But it's a nice work as you go, and it's a nice sit down and do the process, not necessarily aim for a finished product. So I'm going to show you how I do English paper piecing today, and some of the things you can do with it as you go, because there's lots and lots of options. So English paper piecing is really probably some of the most simple sewing you can do. And this was how quilts would have been made long before there were sewing machines. So the basic shape that I've got for you today that I'll show you how I based is a hexagon. My preferred size is 1 inch, only because that's what I started with, and I have an awful lot of them at home. And I'm really lazy, so I'm really lazy. I don't cut my fabric to the hexagon shape. Lots of times on these, I just start with 2.5 inch strips and cut squares that are about 2.5 inches across. Hexagons, depending how you lay them out, they're longer one way and shorter one way, so rectangles work pretty well. And then traditionally I've used wonder clips to hold my first side in place as I get started. It doesn't matter which side that is. But the downside to a wonder clip is that your thread wraps around it. So the other thing that's available is these really, really fantastic little magnetic sewing pins. These are essentially just good little magnets, and they'll hold your fabric onto your paper for you, and then your stuff won't get caught the same. The thread won't get caught. The one on the front, one on the back. Pretty slick and easy. And then my favorite thread for English paper piecing is a really, really super thin bobbin thread called Deco Bob. And I'm not going to stitch with it today just because it's going to be hard for you guys to see it on camera because it's an 80 weight and it's so fine. But it comes in lots of colors. So I buy spools. I use it on my embroidery machine as well. It's called Deco Bob. And you can get pre-wound bobbins. So the other thing you might want in your arsenal of tools in your little tiny in-the-car sewing kit is a needle threader. It's really, really, really hard to thread needles in a moving vehicle, especially if it's on a bumpy road. So I'm going to grab some black thread. This will be much easier to see. Show you how I based these. But an extra one of these pins to your shirt will be a place to put your needle when you're not using it. So between stitches, you can just tack it to your shirt. And then needles, I like to use ridiculously little ones, because I'm using a ridiculously little thin thread. And those are my needles of choice. The Gold Eye applique needles, size number 10. They're so skinny. They're so little. But a needle threader will make your life a whole lot happier. So on this needle threader, there's 2 ends to it. You can stick that little wire guide through the eye of the needle. And then you get to put your thread through the big fat loop on the wire guide. And then slide it back through. like that, all ready to go. And then when I tie knots, you don't need super big knots when you baste your hexagons. So I wrap the thread around my finger and then roll it across itself. And that'll pull into a knot. And I just use a single strand to baste. I don't need way more thread than that in there. And there's lots of ways of basting your hexagon. Personal opinion, there's no quilt police. Find the way that works for you. I personally don't baste through my papers, which means I don't have giant holes through the corners and I can reuse my papers pretty easily. You might find that you don't like doing that because the papers pop out on you. It happens to me sometimes. Usually if I'm piecing in the car, there's a trail of little pieces as I sew them together later on. We'll get the first bit of thread up underneath the first fold in there, and I'm not totally digging where I had put that clip, but that's okay. I'm going to go back up through there, and then I'm going to fold this over on itself and hold it down in place. And then in the corner, I just take a stitch across the corner. And then doesn't matter whatever works best for you along here, I fold my next side in. And I do a couple stitch up and down through the side and then come up through my next fold. The other thing I like to do before I even get started, I usually starch my fabric before I cut it. It's a little easier to work with if it's starched, and your folds are a little crisper as you go, because just the warmth of your fingers will help to crease it. Oops, got a little skinny over here. Things shifted on me. Cut this piece a little narrow. Definitely cut this a little narrow. Whoops. Looks big enough when I started. Good news. We're done with little tiny scraps of fabric, so it's not really a big deal if you have to abandon one of them. That one the opposite way, just to throw myself off. And this is definitely a personal preference. Each person that does this does it slightly differently. Find a way that works for you. This usually works really happily for me, and a little knot there. Do another one like that, but less less awkward. I have another one. Let's keep going. So I just live with a little bucket of these in front of me. And that's what your little thread tray is for. That could sit on your lap in the car. There's that little SewTite fabric. Oh yeah, I cut this piece bigger. That's better. So again, the knot, twist around your finger and roll the thread off. Another tiny little hexagon ready to go. At this point, you can start figuring out how you're going to lay them out. Whatever that might look like. There's so many options. Make a whole bunch and then lay them out. make 3 and decide as you go. Personally, I baste for a long, long time and then I sew them together. Like I'll baste like 100 and then sew. That works better for me. I like getting in a groove and being able to go on a run with a whole bunch. When I'm ready to sew them together, more thread. I left myself a tiny little bit earlier. My goal every time I sit down to sew them together is to find the most efficient way through the pattern that I can. Because I don't like starting and stopping, and I don't really like the long runs that happen when you have to backtrack. So I'm going to do this with black, even though I would not actually stitch this with black when I was ready to go. So when I start sewing these together, if there's a whole bunch, I like to work in rows. So if this was what I was aiming for, this would be laid out 1 row and a second row. The line down between the two, so row 1, row 2, the line that connects the two is the straightest path through, and up in between there's just a little join, if that makes sense. So on here, I would go here, join this one, backtrack to here, join here, up here, backtrack here. We'll go through a couple here. Because this is the fun part. It's much easier to do while you drive. I start the same way with a knot in the end of my thread. And I come up from the back of one. Easier to see with a white one. So good sides together. I'm going right through the corners to keep them aligned. If you don't like squeezing, this is again a place to use your SewTites pen, magnetic pens. And as it's making that loop, I come back through that loop at the corners to tie a little knot. I do a whip stitch because that's what works for me. There's some people that ladder stitch these. You just want to grab a thread or two right in the fold. And if you're doing this with the decal bob thread, it's really, really thin and it's nearly impossible to see on the front when you flip these open. If the fingers are delicate, you might want a thimble. If I was wearing a thimble, I would put it on my middle finger on my right hand. I don't wear a thimble. I go rogue. Thimbles are just one more thing to lose in the car. I keep track of scissors and needles, but don't want to lose a thimble in the car. And when you get to the end, I do a second stitch right in the corner. And come up through that loop again to tie a little knot. First two joined. Then you figure out where your next piece fits in and where your tail's coming out. You go up this way first. And even though I just did a knot on the other piece, I'm still going to knot here. I have had to backtrack and remove plexis, which is no fun because I got excited and got too far and things didn't fit together properly. The big quilt top behind me, I took the paper out kind of section by section. In the middle of the section, left my edge papers in. They're still in because it was just too stiff to work with. So this side is joined, and then I don't like cutting thread and tying new knots, so I actually backtrack. This is only 1 inch. If this was longer than 1 inch, I would cut and trim, but it's just 1 inch. So I'm going to backtrack back to the corner. And then you fold that one in half. And go down your other side. And then maybe you're a person who likes making little things and just doing a few of these. You could applique your English paper piecing onto something else, onto a background fabric. You could make something small like a flower and machine sew it onto something else. You could use a little tiny bit of English paper piecing as a fabric in a bag front or a detail somewhere else. You don't have to make an entire quilt. You can, by all means. It's fun. It's not fast. And there's some beautiful, beautiful patterns out in the big wide world for entirely English paper piece quilt tops. I know we have some books in behind me today. I'll grab it in a minute. Okay, each author's going to have their own take on the right way to navigate through here. And each shape that you deal with is going to be a little bit different. I fold. Could add this one here, and then here. You can do whatever you want. Great. I'll add one more in. Let's backtrack through here. I wouldn't backtrack black thread under the white normally, but that would get us back to this corner to go up this side. Part way. You can continue on that direction. Up the line. And then there's other fun shapes that are, I have some of those maybe. My other favorite shape is a half hexagon. I have some basted already. And they will allow you to fill in edge pieces. So on my quilt right now, the big edge of my quilt, the big long edge, I've got weird little gaps along the sides. So I've got half hexagons that can go in there. I don't have them made yet. That's part of the whole I needed to come to work and pick borders for my quilt. But we'll fill in along the sides, and then along the bottom, you end up with little skinny triangles. But I'm not ready to cross that bridge yet. So you could do super skinny little triangles to make that a flat edge as well. That would be roughly the shape of the white there to fill in the gap along the bottom. And then you would have straight edges to sew borders onto, which might make you a whole lot happier than trying to sew a border on the other way. Or I could applique it down onto something. There's really not a wrong answer. Do what makes you happy on this. There's lots and lots of ways. But you can just make individual little shapes and applique them on. Make big shapes and applique them on. There's so many options. You could do really big hexagons. These are 3-inch ones. If the little ones are daunting, try the big ones. Or go smaller. These are half-inch. They're really little. I'm not that crazy. But really all you desperately need is thread, paper, and like cardstock type weight, and needles. Maybe some scissors and some fabric. It's really, really, really easy, and it's really enjoyable. It makes me really happy. So anyway, I don't do only machine things. Sometimes I do other stuff. I think that's all I was going to show you today, guys. So thank you so much for joining me. Be safe, be kind, be calm, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.